The Enigma of Gleaming Hall. There exists a place that no one can find twice. Gleaming Hall. Hidden deep in the mountains, its location seems to shift, and it's not marked on any map. People speak of it in hushed voices, each telling a different version of its story. Some say it's a house, others claim it's a maze of endless corridors, constantly rearranging itself. But all agree on one thing: once you enter, you're never the same. For Raj, an ambitious writer searching for inspiration, Gleaming Hall seemed the perfect retreat. He brought his wife Neha and their son Arjun, hoping to rekindle his writing spark. The moment they arrived, though, something felt wrong. The house was old but not decrepit, more like it had been waiting, silent, for someone to arrive. From the first night, things were off. The mansion's layout made no sense. Rooms were larger on the inside than they appeared from the outside, and hallways stretched further the longer you walked them. Mirrors seemed to appear and disappear at will. Clocks on the walls didn't work, but the ticking would echo at night, even though none of the hands ever moved. Raj dismissed it as the quirks of an old house. But then Arjun began waking up at odd hours, pointing into dark corners of their room, insisting he could see the tall man. At first, Raj thought it was just a child's imagination. But then Neha started hearing things, too. Whispers from behind doors they hadn't opened, footsteps that would stop the second you turned to look. Neha became convinced the house was watching them. Raj thought it was nonsense until he stumbled upon the room. It was an evening like any other, yet the door leading to the kitchen took him somewhere else entirely, a room they hadn't seen before. It was lined with bookshelves filled with dust-covered volumes, and in the center was a massive mirror, larger than any they'd encountered. In the reflection, he saw himself, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood Arjun, his face expressionless, staring straight through the mirror. And behind Arjun, there was a figure, tall, blurred, and smiling. Raj turned, but no one was there. Shaken, he left the room and tried to show Neha later, but the room was gone, replaced by a hallway they swore hadn't been there before. Over the following days, Raj's sense of time began to blur. He'd sit down to write, only to realize hours had passed, even though it felt like minutes. Neha complained of losing track of entire mornings. Time didn't flow right in Gleaming Hall. Sometimes, they would hear voices calling from outside, but when they opened the door, nothing was there, only the forest, shrouded in mist, with trees that seemed to shift position. The whispers became more frequent, more frantic. "Get out before it's too late." Raj dismissed them as figments of his imagination, until the night Arjun disappeared. They searched every room, every corner, but he was nowhere to be found. Desperation clawed at Raj as they frantically retraced their steps. And then they found it, the door they'd never noticed before, small and barely visible, hidden in the shadows. Inside was a room unlike any other in the house, dark, cold, with a single chair placed in the center, facing yet another mirror. There, sitting in the chair, was Arjun. He wasn't moving. He stared at his own reflection, but in the mirror, he was older, his face twisted in fear. Raj rushed to grab him, but his hand passed through air as though Arjun was no longer there, but an image, a memory, reflected in the glass. The mirror seemed to hum with an energy, warping the space around it. Neha screamed, snapping Raj from his trance. The house was shaking now, walls shifting, doors disappearing. And then, they saw him, the tall man. Not in the mirror this time, but in the room with them. His face was obscured, his presence cold and heavy, but he didn't move. Raj and Neha fled, sprinting down endless corridors that seemed to loop back on themselves. The house itself was alive, closing in, twisting reality around them. The air hummed with a single message, a warning that repeated itself in their minds: you should have never come. In the end, they stumbled out into the forest, breathless and confused. But when they looked back, Gleaming Hall was gone, as though it had never been there at all.